So great to be here. Great to have you here, Thomas.
Thank you.
So obviously we've heard today that the UK's strategic direction is clear, but there is this kind of critical gap in cross-government data infrastructure. So identity, authoritative registers, standards, APIs, and governance that will actually enable interoperable, privacy-preserving services. So it's a huge challenge, but to offer some insights on how this might be done, I'm delighted to be joined by Thomas, who has actually helped deliver Denmark's digital transformation, implementing common platforms, data sharing that have cut across institutions and life events. And clearly, Denmark isn't the UK. Its population is much smaller. Public attitudes differ. But really, I think Thomas can offer lessons that we can all maybe apply in the UK, and also sort of maybe some pitfalls that we can avoid. So we're going to cover sort of like four main areas: the starting point, like why and what good look like. We're going to cover how you actually make it happen, so governance, prioritization, delivery and practice, outcomes, meaning like what actually changed for citizens and frontline staff and the economy, and also collaboration, how you get the right people to agree on the right data. We are going to leave a little bit of time for questions. There is a clock, fabulous. So please do have a think about what you want to ask Thomas. So let's start at the beginning. Why did Denmark embark upon this journey? And I think what would be interesting to learn is what the original vision was around expected benefits for citizens, frontline staff, and also, obviously, the broader economy.
I think we've talked about Estonia today. A small country, Denmark a little bit bigger, 6 million. But the thing where the comparison between Estonia and Denmark is different is in the structure. So Denmark is structured more like the UK, local government, regional government, and state government. And to be honest, when we embarked on this journey back in 2000, 2001, the main issue was really the economy. There really wasn't money to develop many of the things we needed to do. And so one of the things that was mandated from the Ministry of Finance was we need to start leveraging our investments way better than we're doing today. The idea of investing just in the different areas of government and doing it themselves was taken off the table. So back in 2001, we made the first national digital strategy. Now, some of the things that made this successful was, one, we had one national strategy, that helps, but two, the way it was funded. So it was funded in a way that local government paid 40%, regional government paid 20%, and state government paid 40%. So all initiatives were basically funded by all areas of government. By doing that, you basically had all levels of government engaging. And even though I was representing local government, I would develop a component that could be used by the entire government sector. So I wasn't just developing for different areas. We started early discussing some of the key infrastructures we would need. We talked about communication, we talked about ID, we talked about how do we create easy way to pay citizens on all these social services, benefits, things like that. And there was agreement across all levels of government, this should be something that should be national components, not components owned by different areas of government. This was driven by the Ministry of Finance. And in the beginning, it was very much an agenda that was centered around savings. How do we as government become more efficient so we can save money? So that was about the first 10 years. When we hit about the 10-year mark, there was a big flip, and it became much more about citizen services. So how do we actually create value for citizens? Because what happened in the process is you make a lot of digital processes, and you start pushing the work out to the citizens. Now they need to sit there and fill everything out and send it back to you, and you get it a little cheaper. So it's been an evolving process in Denmark, but the main thing was basically agreeing we will have to, as a government, stop thinking completely silo. We need to start thinking horizontal when we develop these infrastructure components, and we all need to use them. Now, this was a battle, it was a political battle. How do we get taxation to use the same components the rest of us are using? They are big, they are powerful. How do we get other areas of government to do this? But there were some brave politicians, and we succeeded in doing that, and I'll get into some of the benefits in a minute.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued. You talk about this areas of kind of, shared interest, shared concern between local and central government. Like, how did you develop kind of almost, you said initially it was economic.
Yes.
The shared priorities beyond that, how did you develop that? How did that actually work in practice?
So I think once you embark on this and you start seeing the first results of what you're doing, you kind of get, if you will, almost momentum to say, okay, if we can do it in this area, we can do it in this area and this area. So we started that. And what we found was some of the decisions that were made early on around communications, for instance. We built an infrastructure to communicate with all citizens and companies in Denmark. And we used this infrastructure to basically accelerate other processes around digital transformation. And there were some brave politicians back in 2013, 2014, that decided we're going to make this mandatory. Now imagine when somebody in government says, from tomorrow on, we all communicate digitally. This became an absolute accelerator for us. Because now, as I'm sitting in a government office, I need to figure out how do I support this new approach that we have chosen. So in Denmark today, all companies can only receive communication digitally. Citizen, it's an opt-out. So this is how it is. But these infrastructures have become absolute accelerators for the things we are doing. So when we are developing new services, we are thinking more in how do we communicate with the citizens? How does the communication go back to us? How do we get it back into the back-end systems? How do we automate it? And we can do that more globally than if you're just doing it in one department where you're thinking, my own data, my own processes. So we do it much more globally. So I think starting as early as we did also meant the whole data foundation became much easier for us to deal with because we had data collection across all these infrastructures. We did do, and I was part of this, we spent 8 years doing register modernization, and you would be surprised of how much crap data there is in our registries. It was supposed to take 4 years, it took 8 years. We had to redo our data models. We had to have big negotiations and fights over who owns what data. But today we have that. We are today just distributing all the registered data through one distribution platform, which means when I build a new system, I don't care if I'm a municipality or I'm the finance ministry, I go through this infrastructure and I can get access to all the data. Before, I would have to travel around and negotiate with every area of Danish government to get access to their data. It took a very, very long time. It was very, very expensive, and the quality of data was not very good. So some of those principles around how we structured the whole data foundation has helped us really generate speed and acceleration, and as we embark on AI here, I'll give you some examples on how that is really giving us a whole new opportunity.
Yeah, definitely want to dig into AI in a second, but just stepping back for a little bit, we had the gentleman from HMRC just now talking about the fact that it would be great if he knew from the Home Office when people had returned to their country of origin, so he didn't end up paying them family allowance. Like, talk us through that building of the foundation, the data foundations, how you built that confidence from, you mentioned, siloed organizations, how you got to them to share data across, across organizationally.
So one of the very keys that are being discussed across Europe now is when you want to really become data-driven and you want to be able to tie things together, build coherent journeys, you are really dependent on ID. Your ability to tie attributes to ID. So any type of data you have, if you cannot tie it to a person's ID, it's very, very difficult for you to provide these coherent journeys where you have different parts of the public sector trying to basically draw it together. This is a huge discussion in the EU right now. That agenda is really being pushed because we're also trying to do much more cross borders. And if I cannot identify the person, I cannot deliver them the service, I cannot help them in all these different areas of society. So that was decided early on, we must have one ID. Now we took it one step further in Denmark. So we actually built an ID that was owned partly by the private sector, partly by the public sector. So today we have an ID called Mit ID, so my ID, which can be used in the private and the public sector. It's a huge advantage because the other thing that's happening now, it's being tied to company ID. So now I can act on behalf of my organization in different capacities. And this is also what we're seeing in the European space now. How can we basically become better at using the data that's tied to a person in a more active way across borders as well as nationally? So that was really a shift for us, that we got one national ID and we basically killed all other IDs in a span of probably a year or two.
Can I just ask, did you have a national ID at that point, or was that something new that you had to sell to citizens?
We did not, but we had bank ID. And the banks have been very good because they knew this principle. If I'm going to give somebody a loan, I better know who they are. So they had actually federated. They had an ID, and government saw this and said, this seems like a pretty good idea. Maybe we should team with them, which they did. But government also saw, if we're going to do this for government business, we need to have ownership to this ID. And from a citizen standpoint, I'm probably also where I would say, yes, government needs to own this ID. It can be used by the financial sector and other sectors, but government needs to own it. And that's what happened.
It's a big challenge politically, ID. We have our own troubled history of ID in the UK, and it would be a huge challenge for any government to get that kind of past the UK citizenship. So maybe kind of like in terms of like that, the other components, like whatever it is, digital post, payments, registers.
Yes.
How do you think about those?
So I think, as a government in Denmark, and when I was there, we were thinking very traditionally. We were thinking in, we have infrastructure that provides us data, then we build apps and we build the portals, and we basically this is how we deliver our services. Along the way, and I think maybe around 5 years ago, we started really focusing on coherency. How do I build journeys for citizens? Citizens are complex. They have many problems. Different areas of government need to support them. How do we build this so that we can basically service these citizens much better? ID was one thing, but the other thing was how do we communicate well between government agencies and the citizen? And that was the infrastructure we had. So today, when I look at the Danish infrastructure and how we communicate with citizens, that infrastructure is also used to communicate between government agencies. Where many government agencies today are thinking very traditional across Europe, saying, well, if my system's going to talk to your system, we're going to build some kind of integration, and then we're going to maintain it, and we're going to change it, we're going to do all these things. It's very expensive, and it's not very reliable, whereas the secure communication infrastructure really fills that purpose. Now, the next thing that happens is we say, well, wait a minute, all these services that we're developing as apps, and we put them up as portals, and we do all this, can't we just do this more on demand? So when a citizen is looking for a service and write to me, hey, I'm looking for this service, can I send them a form? Can they fill it out? Can it goes right back into my back-end system? So over the last 2 or 3 years, we have really scaled back on developing a lot of apps and portals and those type of applications. And we are much more thinking in how do we create basic forms that we can change on the fly, and we can interact with citizens much easier. The other thing is, in the way we're communicating today, we're not just sending PDFs, we're sending data-carrying documents, XML format, so we can get data in. This also gives a great opportunity to quality check the data that we have from the citizen. So if I'm missing a piece of data in a casework, boom, I send it out in a form saying, please provide me these 2 pieces of data. Is this address correct? Whatever it is. And that dialogue becomes now the data highway for much of the data that we're actually bringing in to government today. So it's a different approach, and as AI is arriving now, we're kind of taking it to the next level.
And I'm intrigued, just going back to that digital identity piece, I guess, like, how did you sell in these shifts to people maybe who were digitally hesitant? Like, it's very hard at the beginning to sort of show people the benefits of this. Like, what was the kind of the messaging around it?
So I think what we had learned in Denmark, what I've learned the hard way too, is trust is good, but usability is better. So when you actually provide very good services and good service flows, citizens will use it. If the alternative is walk down to the citizen center, stand there in line for 2 hours to get whatever permit, or they could do it online at night, they will go online, and we've seen trust over time actually go up. Now, we have 2 parameters trust we follow. One is trust in government. It's fairly high in Denmark, but we also have trust in data. That's actually lower. How is government actually managing, handling my data? Now, one of the things we've done along the way, this was a big political fight in Denmark, was we started to open up and share data that's tied to my ID, so I can go in and I can basically see what data does government have on me. And that has actually lifted the trust quite a bit, that you can see this is the data that they're basically doing their casework on, or whatever it is. So we basically took the caseworkers' data screen and we flipped it, and we are showing it in different categories to the citizen. So that journey of becoming an open data government has been quite substantial, and it has changed the way the thinking is also from a political standpoint. Today, the norm is when we build something, think about how do we share that data? How is that data being shown to the citizen, and how can it assist in basically helping citizen make judgment calls on different things in their interaction with government? And this is a different approach than I see for many governments across Europe today.
When we talked earlier this week, you used a really interesting phrase. I thought it was interesting. You talked about, we always think that we have to reinvent the wheel when reusing is actually preferable. Could you just dig into that for the audience, please?
Yeah. So first of all, I think what we saw in Denmark early on was the rebuilding of things again and again. Different agencies basically building the same functionality. So that's really number one. Number two is what we are finding when we look across government. We look at the different processes. We look at the different areas of government. We find that the base processes and the engines we use are between 60 and 70% the same. So what we're seeing today is basically when we go out and we take, if I took a system from the Justice Department in Denmark and I moved it to the Justice Department in Bavaria, I would be hitting a reuse level of about 60 to 70%. And then there is what we call either a country layer or a department layer that will be adjusted based on their processes or how they basically operate. But too often, we convince ourselves we have to build it from the bottom. We are very special, and we can't even get the market to do it because they don't understand us, so we build it ourselves, which in Denmark for many years created huge scandals and cost through the roof. So the idea of reuse, and I think, I came from Scotland the other day. Scotland has looked at Denmark. They've looked at the digital mailbox infrastructure, the communication infrastructure. And as they're trying to say, how do I accelerate my digital transformation? What could be a key infrastructure? They picked that infrastructure. So this will be rolled out in Scotland. This will be a copy or nearby of the Danish infrastructure. We will build the country layer, the Scottish country layer, if you will, adapted to that. But the cost is a fraction of the idea that Scotland should do this themselves. A fraction. And the business case is unbelievable. The first business cases we're looking at is, the NHS sending out cancer screening. Some of these letters arrive in the mailbox after you should have been at the hospital. Sometimes the citizens show up, they didn't know they were supposed to bring things. Oh my God. So the business case just on paper is about £3 million. The business case on lost time, saved lives, so on, over 3 years is £32 million. So it's just to say these infrastructures are so key in driving digital transformation, but also key in transforming how we deliver services to citizens and give them an opportunity to basically get a value out of this digital transformation we're doing.
And we can see, obviously, you know, Estonia is the nation state that people talk about when they talk about digital transformation. Clearly, there's been huge amounts of success in Denmark too. Like, how do you think about this globally in terms of, is Europe heading in the right direction? Are we leaders? Or are there other places in the world that we can look towards where you really think there's being some good work being done?
I think to be fair, when we look at Europe, Europe's biggest problem is fragmentation. We are so fragmented, not just across Europe, but also in our own countries. We operate in silos. We think we need to basically build our own in silos. And so when I look at other countries, and especially now I work a lot with Germany, they are way behind. I mean, they may make UK look like a really front runner here, but they have changed their mindset. With the new government there, they are saying, okay, we need to rethink how we are delivering services now. So from a federal standpoint, they're looking at what they call the Deutschland stack. So they're looking at what are the key infrastructure components that we in Germany should have that should be national. It should go across all 16 lenders. And this will likely be transformative for Germany. This will accelerate their transformation. I think in other countries we are looking at today, they have done a very good job digitizing silos, but they have done a very poor job tying it together. And so what I'm seeing is I see a good value case for government, for the individual departments. I see a very, very poor value case for citizens. And I think that mindset has to change across Europe. If we go to other parts of the world, if we go to China, Korea, and so on, they are running way ahead of us because they're not that fragmented. They basically sit at the top and say, this is how we're going to do it, let's roll it out. And this is where in Europe, we keep playing digital transformation like a democratic sport. It is not. At best, it's a team sport. But if you really want to drive transformation, somebody needs to sit at the end of the table, put down the direction, and drive it. And digital transformation is really not about being right or wrong. It's really about evolving into something and then adjust as you learn. So I'm seeing too much discussion in Europe about who should be owning what and how, and I need my own, and these discussions are not really making it easy for us to make digital transformation at a pace we need to at this point.
But presumably that has to come from the top. That has to come from government. There has to be the will to do it, right? I mean, that's fundamentally, we're talking about a political problem or a structural problem or a cultural problem, or...
I think it's partly a structural problem, it's partly a political problem. I think if you don't have a burning platform for digital transformation, it's difficult. And to be fair, across Europe, we probably have too much money. And so I don't need to. I could, but I don't need to. And it is a problem for us. So I think we need to find these burning platforms that's going to drive us and that's going to basically drive us together. I know the geopolitical situation now is driving some of this digital sovereignty. Other things are being driven under that burning platform. But I think we need to really start thinking about how do we create value for the citizen. I looked at some of the numbers that was on this morning. We talked about spend. How much do we spend? I think that's fascinating to me. How much value do we create for the spend is really much more in line with what I would like to discuss. If I look today, just to give you two examples, the cost per citizen in Denmark, which is at the top of the world of digital government, is half of that of the Netherlands. Half. If I go to Hamburg, which is way behind, they spend 3 times as much per citizen to deliver services that are well below what we are seeing. So to me, we can talk about spend, but we need to talk about what is the value output that we are really giving the citizen. And large spend does not give successful digital transformation. I can tell you that.
So what KPIs do you put, when you look at Hamburg, the Netherlands, Denmark, like, are they different KPIs that are coming into play or different?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to go to the Danish digitization agency, their homepage. So every 6 months, we run basically statistics, and we go out and ask the citizens, what do you think of this? user-friendliness in all different key areas. And these are basically KPI inputs to the next strategy. Where should we invest to bring the next level of value? And sometimes we get surprised. Some of the areas, for instance, could be digital inclusion. As you embark on this journey, it becomes more and more important that more and more of your citizens basically can be part of this ecosystem. And sometimes it's when you have a strong digital foundation, I can basically take over and assist my parents, for instance. When I have a clear ID, I have access to all communications. So there are certain things that basically then makes life easier, better for parts of our population that are struggling today. So those things becomes more apparent and more visible in these type of KPI measurements that we're doing.
Sure, and of course, Thomas, I am legally obliged now to ask you about artificial intelligence.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, we're seeing governments striving for efficiencies by reaching for it. We're told that it will be an engine of growth. We're told that it will be a way of saving costs. We're told that it will bring greater efficiency. Like, do you see any implementation at the moment that you really think? And by the way, sorry, I'm comparing this to the private sector now, where there was a recent study out of MIT that suggests that 95% of all corporate AI pilot programs have provided no efficiencies and no actual gains to the business. Like, are we seeing real change, do you think, using AI in government? Are there things that we can point to and say, yeah, actually, this has actually changed the way we deliver services, or this has created greater efficiencies? Or is it just, everything's harder in government than it is in the private sector. So how do we best implement it in government? Sorry, very long, convoluted question. But I guess I'd just like to get your perspective on how best to use it.
So I think, and it's actually been very positive sitting here during the day, listening to some of these panels. And one of the things that's been pointed out again and again is our foundation is not strong enough. We don't have a good enough foundation. It isn't coherent. We don't have the data quality. And this is very, very true. And so if we look at how AI in the future is going to be a strong accelerator for government services, we really need to stop and start looking at our foundation. There is no way we can pull the real value out of this using AI until our foundation is better, more stable, and broader in its scope. So what I see today in government, I obviously see using Gen AI to do support in some of the administrative areas. We see that, and that does help. That does help, but it is a small portion of what can be done. So being Denmark is, as far as we are, we have reached the level of what we call, data-induced development. So we just delivered, actually last week, we delivered the first proof of concept to government of implementing an AI assistant for citizens. Now this goes wall to wall. These are all services in Denmark. 2,200 services and so on. And with the new technology that OpenAI has come with, we are able to securely tie together. Now the big thing in government, where government really can deliver different services, is when you talk about large language models, you have a lot of data out in open space you can use. Everybody can use that, great. It's the moment you start combining the ID-tied data with the open data, the power really comes in. Because now I can really tell a citizen, and I can go through different flows with a citizen, help them do an application while they're driving down the highway. This is where we're at. And we have seen some great use cases in Denmark right now where we have the data foundation to do this. And I will tell you, within 12 months, I think we will see the first AI assistance for citizens. I'm already running pilots on the mailbox where usually you would say, well, we would just receive the letter, we would open it, we would read it. That is going away. We will have an assistant sitting on top that will make me aware I have new mail, this is what it's about, this is what you need to do. Please calculate my salary over the last 3 months. When was my appointment? What was I supposed to bring? All these things can be done interactively if you have the data and if you have the infrastructure. And so you will see the governments that are ahead they will now be able to get even further ahead using AI, and we're seeing it. I was in a meeting in Germany, and there was a politician that said to me, "Thank God, AI is here, it's going to save us." And I said to him, yes, it's going to save us, but it's not going to save you, because you have, AI on fax machines, it's not going to happen. You're going to have to come up with another idea. So this is why I go back and say it's really about the foundation, and I really like that the discussion here is about the foundation. It's about your data quality. It's about your ability to share data. And AI can help these processes, but you need to think foundation.
Okay, so you're talking to a room full of people who live in a country where our National Health Service is still the world's biggest procurer of pagers and fax machines. Like, that's a big step for us to sort of, to make. Like, talk us through, like, what are the baby steps? Like, how do we really think about implementing this in a way that is, there are so many ways in which I'm sure we can create efficiencies and join up, services, but like, what does that mean in practice for a very kind of, convoluted, fragmented?
So I think, for me, and I think this has been kind of a thing that's become more and more clear to me as I've embarked on different journeys, both in Denmark but also in other countries. And this is a conversation that has taken place in Scotland, it's taken place in Germany now. I think we are underestimating the power of communication and communication infrastructure. Communication is very, very good for us, especially if we can combine it into a data highway as well. And it's somewhat neutral, because we all use it, we all need it, and we really shouldn't care if it's owned by an agency over here, if they basically make it available. Same with the British Post here. I'm sure we don't need 5 of those. So I think in thinking in key infrastructures that can be accelerators, but also can become highways for some of the things we're trying to do. And so I think, as I'm talking to GDS and I'm telling them they should do this, I just hope that HMRC, DWP, others say, that would be awesome. Let's have this common infrastructure that we can use, and we don't all have to jump on right now, but we have it, and then we can start hooking into it, and we can start using it. And that's what I call baby steps. Build the capability and have people get on. This is what we're going to be doing in Scotland. This is what Bund in Germany is talking about doing. They may not have all the data, they may not have all the services, but now they get an infrastructure on which they can start basically distributing, but also accelerating some of these processes. And I think, to me, that is what you need to do. You need to find these common infrastructures that will accelerate the coherency in your digital transformation.
Okay, so a couple more questions for Thomas, but please do, we're going to have, I think, a few minutes for questions. I hope there's a roving microphone, but please do start thinking about any questions you might have for Thomas. So you talked at the beginning, Thomas, about sort of savings and the finance ministry being the kind of like the real driver of this Danish digital transformation. Can you just talk a little bit about what evidence showed the changes were working beyond cost savings and beyond the cost savings?
Yeah, so I think early on, I came from big tech in the US when I came back to Denmark, and first thing, some of my first meetings, I got knocked over the head because I started talking business cases, and we got to have good business cases, and they say, stop. We got to have good value cases. And I said, okay. So that's what we talk about, value cases. So what we talk about is, there's a financial aspect, but there's certainly a service aspect, there's a citizen aspect in this, and we need to look at this 360. So some of the effects we're seeing is, for instance, to apply for housing benefits. These are people that are really struggling. If it takes you 12 months to approve housing benefits, most of them will be in big trouble. That's how the situation is in Germany. In Denmark, it takes 3 weeks, because we have the data, we can process it quick, we have automated most of the casework. So what we are seeing is, like I said, the value obviously in the savings for government, but also the value that the citizen are seeing much quicker communication, much quicker decisions. when they communicate, when they receive something from government, they can answer right back into that message. It'll go right back to the right person in government that can answer and get it going. So this is also about speed. It's about getting the right services to the right people at the right time. And all of these aspects is really a result of a strong digital government. It's really what we aim for. So, and many of these citizens, if we look at our citizens, we know that about 20% of them probably take about 80% of our budget in social services. They're complex people. They need a lot of services from different areas of government. The more you can tie this together, the more you can deliver on a joint type of service journey, the better off they are.
So, kind of final question for me. UK is kind of 11 times the population of Denmark. Obviously, Germany is even larger. What kind of breaks at UK-Germany scale and what doesn't? Like, what can we really implement from the Danish model, do you think?
So I think, for me, scaling is obviously tough. And it's tough when you go to the scale you have here because of pure size. But I think some of the principle, some of the structures work just as well in a large setup. We're seeing that, and we are having the same discussions in Germany. You will do it a little different because you do need a little bit more autonomy out locally, where it needs to be maybe be at least capable of being adjusted more to local type setups and things like that. But as a whole, the principles of how you do it, the way you design around service journeys, the way you're thinking data quality, all these things apply, whether you are 1 million or 80 million or whatever you are. And then in your implementation and your setup, yes, of course you need to think about how do I do this smart, and are there parts of my infrastructure I need to basically set up differently to cover what I'm covering here. And maybe in the UK you will have less of common infrastructure and more of regional infrastructure, but driven by standards. I mean, there are different ways to skin that cat, but if you cannot follow some of the same standards, both on data and data infrastructure, you will struggle.
Thomas, thank you. Tour de force. Anyone got a question they'd like to put to Thomas? We're going to have hopefully a roving mic coming. Come on, there must be some questions. Gentleman over there.
Thank you. Sebastian Fiaz, Commercial Director at the Met. How did you build the capability in Denmark so that you had the right skills, both in the public sector and the private sector?
So I think one of the things we haven't discussed here is obviously, and it was on stage earlier, about thinking about how you structurally and from a whole business setup run this. So we have done some things in Denmark that is different. For instance, for all local governments, we built, and I used to run that agency that was removed, or a company removed from the government a little bit, doing procurement for all local government. All their strategic systems, all their infrastructure is bought in one place, rolled out in one place. So I think a lot of it is around the structure, and it requires some political will. We had huge problems in Denmark, which you have here as well, with the budgets. The budget cycle starts here, it stops here. IT doesn't work that way. IT starts here, and maybe it stops there, or maybe it stops over there. And as politicians change in this ecosystem, new ideas arrive, and no politician wants to be associated with something the predecessor did or whatever. So this is a huge problem. So in Denmark, we tried to isolate it. So we had some of these budgets that were basically just tied to here, not a private, but a government-owned organization. We had the money. We invested it, government would pay back, and we would reinvest it. So there are different business models you can do to act against these huge hurdles that we have in investing in digital transformation. So I think there will have to be a discussion here about the structure as well. How do you set it up to accomplish some of the things that you need to accomplish? But these are not, overnight processes. These are long processes.
Thank you. Just here, please. And then we're going to go over there.
You touched on it very briefly earlier, but what were your challenges that you faced when it came to things like data sovereignty? It's a massive buzzword at the moment, and people are talking about cloud repatriation and concerns about data being in the cloud. I'm just wondering how that impacted what you did and what you potentially would do here.
So I think, and I'm participating in a lot of panels and hearings across Europe right now on digital sovereignty. And I think there's some things that needs to be kind of clarified. When you're talking digital sovereignty, you are not just talking open source. That's number one. Digital sovereignty is really about control. And so what we did in Denmark was we worked very closely with the private market, but we also saw that government, this isn't necessarily the best to own IP. So what we did was we made a model where we said, government will take full usage right on everything developed. We manage how it's being operated, everything we do there, but we also have full access to all source code. So if we choose so, we can buy that source code, we can have another vendor come in, and so on. So we have been very much aware. This was also why the ID went from being owned by the financial sector to basically being owned by the government because of digital sovereignty. And then they put it out so everybody else can use it. So we've been very aware in what we've been doing. Now, of course, we are also struggling with the tech giants. So many of the systems in Denmark, government systems, they are running in local data centers. They are running on-prem because we have not been satisfied with this digital sovereignty we get in the cloud. Now we are trying to find out what do we do moving ahead, because we are seeing the need to move into cloud environments to basically bring in some new services, but that has been the strategy. So it's an important issue and it's a good question.
Hi, Ezra from Stellarman. It all sounds really fascinating, and I think you touched on a point about it taking 8 years to get the data modelling right. Appreciate there's so many government bodies, so many different authorities across the UK. What would you recommend as those sort of baby steps while the action happens within central government? What can everyone else be doing to get the ball rolling?
So I think for the UK, and you're absolutely right, scale-wise, it's a different scale. But there are basic things that you can start with. There are there are personal data, there's HMRC data, there's data that is being used more often than other. And I think you need to start in a priority list of what is really the most important data that we use in the most places across our ecosystem. And I think once that is done, then you need to develop, like, if you want the data model, the ownership of data, where and so on, and then that needs to be, over time, rolled out to other areas. Now, ours is also an evolving ecosystem. New registries pop up, new things are added to registries, so this is an ongoing effort. But you need to start with the core and say these are probably the 10, 20, 30 most used registries. Let's get the cleanup there and let that be the foundation for what we do across the rest of the ecosystem. Because you cannot, and that is government, many times the problem, government try to do everything at once. You cannot do that in this space. You have to think local and then global.
Any more questions? Okay, I'm going to ask a question then. A little bit of takeaway then, maybe for people in the room. Sort of, can you give, I don't know, just give a sense for both leaders in this room and also for delivery teams about how best they can learn. Like, what would be the simple lesson you would give, how best they can learn from the Danish experience in the UK?
So I think too often leadership is about what I can build myself, what I can accomplish with my team. I wish in many cases, and I think over time we've seen that change in Denmark, leadership has become much more about my ability to use the ecosystem in which I exist. How am I able to basically get value out of what others have done, what they are bringing to the table, so I, as a leader in this ecosystem, basically drive value out of the services I'm delivering using other resources in my ecosystem. There's too little focus on that. There's too much focus on my own mission, my own ability to either build or buy what I need. But I think being much more aware of your ecosystem, being much more aware of how roads to the goal really can look different today in a much more complex world that we live in as a leader, to me, is something that I wish I saw more of in Europe.
And looking forward, let's look, I know it's hard, 3 to 5 years. I mean, with this pace of AI, it's hard to sort of really look that far out. But what would good look like for Denmark in 3 to 5 years? What would you really like to see?
So I think for me, it's probably, I think our services today are still too, if you will, designed around how government operate. It's I get my daughter calling me up, I got a letter from government, I think they send it in Chinese, I don't understand what they're writing to me. I think as new generations come up, we can call them the TikTok generation, whatever, government needs to start thinking about how are we delivering services in a completely different way than we've done in the past. And I think Denmark will be at least looking at how do we service so many different generations in a digital environment that is different on so many levels. Small things like how do I take a long 4-page letter to a socially challenged person and make it into something actionable. Those type of things where we talk about how we convert this technology to really support some of the most challenged people in our society. I think that is where Denmark is looking right now, because that is also where our budget is flowing today. So I think from a digital standpoint, the challenge is how do we really get the digital footprint all the way down to that level.
Thomas, it's been absolutely fascinating hearing your insights from the Danish experience, and hopefully there are plenty of learnings for people in this room, things they can go away tomorrow and implement, or maybe just some food for thought that they can share with colleagues. But thank you so much for being with us. Absolutely fascinating. Really great to meet you.
Thank you, Greg.